For as the light of the morning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, and covereth the whole earth, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God, and the days will come that you shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and it shall be in his own time, and in his own way, and according to his own will. This is Unveiling Jesus Christ.
Hello and welcome to Unveiling Jesus Christ. I'm John Cassanet, and we have today the third of three podcasts talking about the content found in Revelation 12:10. In the first podcast, we heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now is come salvation." In the second podcast, that same loud voice in heaven said, "Now is come the strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ," which we came to understand to represent the organization of the patriarchal order of the priesthood after the war in heaven. Now, in this third podcast covering the same verse, John wrote, "And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, The accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night." Close quote. This is the subject we will be discussing today in my podcast. For the nutshell version of this podcast, you can check out section 207 in my book that you can find on my website, the new and improved website at unveilingjesuschrist.com. As I mentioned before, it is most likely that the loud voice in heaven in Revelation 12:10 came from the righteous spirits in heaven that had kept their first estate and were about to be appointed to dwell on this earth. They raised their voices to confirm by solemn declaration that which John saw and recorded in Revelation 12:9, saying that the dragon, who bears the names Serpent, Devil, and Satan, was literally cast down to this physical earth at the end of the war in heaven, as I discussed in my podcast on November 23 of 2025. In Revelation 12:10, John is not describing for a second time what he saw and recorded in Revelation 12:9. In this latest verse, John describes the reaction of those spirits who kept their first estate at the time Satan was cast down. Their voices rang out together as though they were one loud voice. And so the question is, what is the emotion behind the voice? And I'm going to give you two guesses, but you will need only one. There can be no doubt that these final righteous spirits who kept their first estate were rejoicing in the fact that Satan was gone from the premortal spirit world called Kolob once and for all. There is no one among you who thinks for a moment that the remaining spirits were weeping and they were sad and crying, saying together, "He was such a nice guy. I'm really going to miss him," right? Am I right? And yet, there are those who describe the physical fall of Satan at the end of the war in heaven and say that Doctrine and Covenants, section 76, verses 25 to 27, describes this event. These verses say, "And this we saw also, and bear record, that an angel of God, who was in authority in the presence of God, who rebelled against the only begotten Son, whom the Father loved, and who was in the bosom of the Father, was thrust down from the presence of God and the Son, and was called Perdition, for the heavens wept over him. He was Lucifer, a son of the morning, and we beheld, and lo, he is fallen, even a son of the morning." Close quote. So here we clearly have a description of Lucifer's or Satan's fall in heaven, but notice that the emotion in these verses is exactly opposite what John describes in Revelation 12:10. In this verse, the loud voice in heaven is clearly rejoicing because Satan has been cast down. And I can almost see myself joining, giving high fives and everything that Satan is cast out. It's a happy time. But in D&C section 76, the mood is sadness, sorrow, and weeping. From this, we must conclude that two different events are being described. The two scriptures are not describing the same thing. I've mentioned this before, that when Lucifer fell at the time of the Grand Council, there was this weeping in heaven over him when he was Lucifer, a son of the morning, who had fallen by his rebellion during the Grand Council. That's what section 76, verses 25 to 27 is describing. Revelation 12:10, by contrast, there is rejoicing and jubilation because the war in heaven has come to an end as Satan falls a second time. Only this time he is physically cast down and out of heaven, as John described in Revelation 12:9. The other phrases in Revelation 12:10 confirm that the loud voice in heaven is one of contentment and rejoicing. It's the same voice that cheers because salvation has come. It's the same loud voice that rejoiced because the kingdom of God and his Christ and the power of his Christ had returned to Kolob as the kingdom of God and of his Christ. That is the type for the second coming of Jesus Christ at the time when he will be victorious over Satan at his second coming, as I discussed in my podcast on November 30th, 2025. So trust me, this is not a loud voice that is expressing sadness or sorrow. You can tell that the spirits who remained in heaven on Kolob loathed Satan and held him in contempt, for they had given him the name of the Accuser. They rejoice that the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. The Hebrew word for Satan means to accuse. Joseph Fielding McConkie tells us that the name Satan means adversary, and that every Old Testament reference to Satan occurs in the context of an adversary who brings an accusation. The Cyclopedia of Biblical, Theological, and Ecclesiastical Literature gives the following explanation of an accuser in the Bible, saying, in 1 Peter 5:8, there is an allusion to the old Jewish opinion that Satan was the accuser or calumniator of men before God. In this application, the forensic sense is still retained, Satan being represented as laying to man's charge a breach of the law, as in a court of justice, and demanding his punishment. Close quote. Richard Draper states that Satan was ho categoron, the accuser. The articulation points the reader directly to this well-known figure. The Greek word is an exact translation of the Hebrew Satan, and is used in a judicial sense of one who prosecutes another. In the Old Testament and Jewish apocryphal writings, there is a tradition preserved of a heavenly law court where Satan was a prominent member. The rabbis understood that there was a heavenly law court presided over by God, with Satan playing the key role of accuser. His role in this court was that of the prosecuting attorney, who witnessed to the sins and weaknesses of the accused. Close quote. As we try to understand Satan's role as the accuser in the context of a heavenly court, you'll be happy to know that this is an area of some expertise for me. For 3 years, I was a trial attorney in the United States Marine Corps, where I tried over 100 courts-martial in military courtrooms. I was also a civil trial attorney for nearly 35 years, and I tried a number of cases throughout Northern California and a few down in Southern California as well. So I definitely know my way around the courtroom. In my military experience, I was the prosecuting attorney who made accusations against the defendants who were on trial in these criminal cases. During my career as a civil litigator, I was most frequently the plaintiff's attorney who pursued a complaint for damages on behalf of my aggrieved clients against the defendants who caused the injury. So yes, I guess you could say that in my earthly trial experience as an attorney, I stood in the shoes of Satan, the accuser in the heavenly realm. Well, now that I think about this, I guess you could say that my profession has clearly given me some expertise in the matter of Satan's accusation, but let's not push the analogy too far, should we? So, if Satan was the accuser in this courtroom drama that played out during the war in heaven, we can only appreciate his role if we also understand who the other players are and what accusations he was making. If we have an accuser, we need an accused. If we have an accused, we need someone who represents and defends the accused. And if these parties exist, there must also be a judge. So Satan is obviously the accuser, which means he's pressing charges. He is the plaintiff who alleges a cause of action or has a dispute against the accused. The accuser is blaming the accused for a crime or some other kind of wrongdoing. In Scripture, an accuser is any enemy or adversary, including a betrayer and slanderer that speaks falsely against another. So it's not like he's making accusations that are actually true, because Satan has been a liar from the beginning, meaning from at least the time of the Grand Council. And we're told in Moses 4:4 that he became Satan, yea, even the devil, the father of all lies, to deceive and to blind men and to lead them captive at his will, even as many as would not hearken unto my voice. Close quote. J. Perry points out that the name devil is not found in the Old Testament. He states that devil is a word found in the New Testament, which was translated from Greek rather than Hebrew. The word means false accuser or slanderer, which is one of Satan's primary tactics against God the Father, the Lord Jesus Christ, and the followers of Christ. We learn from modern revelation that Satan was a liar from the beginning. The word Satan means adversary. He stands in opposition to God, to good, and to all who embrace the Lord and his goodness. Close quote. The 1990 Sperry Symposium adds these additional insights about the accuser and the nature of his accusations, saying, the Greek word translated as devil is ho diabolo. It means the slanderer. To slander means to utter false charges and misrepresent the truth with the intent to defame and damage other individuals. It also means to accuse unjustly. Close quote. Thus we see that Satan, the accuser, is one who falsely accused others of breaking the law and seeking their punishment where no punishment is due. He is the prosecutor or plaintiff at law who speaks in a derogatory manner against those whom he has accused. In the classical Greek language, the accuser connotes a betrayer, a denouncer, or one who speaks evil of another. So who do you suppose Satan betrayed, denounced, and spoke evil of? Certainly, he denounced and accused Michael and the sons of God, who are members of the premortal church, who are the defenders of the faith. Albert Barnes describes this aspect of Satan's accusations in an earthly but parallel setting, saying, the description of Satan as an accuser accords with the opinion of the ancient Hebrews in regard to his character. He is an accuser of the righteous, that he is employed in bringing against them charges affecting their character and destroying their influence. The propriety of this appellation cannot be doubted. It is, as it has always been, one of the characteristics of Satan, one of the means by which he keeps up his influence in the world to bring accusations against the people of God. Thus, under his suggestions and by his agents, they are charged with hypocrisy, with insincerity, with being influenced by bad motives, with pursuing sinister designs under the cloak of religion, with secret vices and crimes. Thus it was that the martyrs were accused. Thus it is that unfounded accusations are often brought against the ministers of the gospel, palsying their power and diminishing their influence, or that, when a professed Christian falls, the church is made to suffer by an effort to cast suspicion on all who bear the Christian name. Close quote. Since the time of the Grand Council, Lucifer has obviously been hostile to God and Jesus Christ. He became their enemy. He was disloyal to God, and he tempted others to follow in his footsteps. I think Richard Draper got it right also when he said, Satan's work, however, had an additional and very malevolent edge. Not only did he accuse people, but he also tried to put them in a position where they would sin so that he could better accuse them. Close quote. Isn't this what we see today in the circle of believers and those who were once in the circle of believers? There are those who commit sin or transgression, but they are well within the reach of the atonement of Jesus Christ, including his full forgiveness. These people remain in a position to repent, and yet Satan, the accuser, persuades them to believe that they cannot come back from whatever it is that they've done. They give up on themselves and the saving grace of Jesus Christ because of the false feelings of hopelessness that Satan engenders in them. Sadly, many abandon themselves to his ruin, and some become so embittered that they take a stand with Satan and share his false ideology. But let's put this in a premortal context. The spirits who were undecided during the Grand Council made a significant mistake, and it was a sin, when they failed to commit themselves by covenant to the gospel of Jesus Christ, which the Father implemented among his children during the Grand Council. It's not hard to imagine that Satan used that sin against these undecided spirits and led them to believe that there was no coming back from their ambivalence and undecidedness. He led them to believe that they were in a position where they were rightfully accused, and the longer they remained unrepentant, the more he had cause to accuse them. And the more he had cause to accuse them, the more they came to believe that the accusations were justified and that they were irretrievably lost. I think of this and say to myself, can you not see that Satan, the accuser, who falsely causes these feelings of hopelessness in the lives of people, is far more guilty himself of the very accusations he makes against people today? Brent Topp said, in the figurative sense, Lucifer was the accuser, in that he was, in verity, a betrayer. He not only betrayed the Father and Jehovah, but also openly and defiantly betrayed and sought to undermine all those laws, principles, and teachings that he himself previously had known to be true. He became perdition, and his followers sons of perdition, in the same way that mortals can descend to such depths. Close quote. Satan's faith-destroying accusations in the first estate mirror his continuing accusations on earth. Brent Topp adds this perspective, saying, almost like echoes from eternity past, one can logically hear Lucifer using the same types of arguments as he denounced Jehovah. He may have accused him of oppressing and misleading the spirit children of God so that he might have power over them. Perhaps, because of the perils inherent in the Father's plan, Satan could cleverly, though falsely, accuse Jehovah of indifference towards his brothers and sisters, since many would be lost. On the other hand, he would have upheld himself as compassionate and concerned by virtue of his liberal plan of non-salvation. Like Korihor in his assault on Alma, Satan would have twisted the truth, calling good evil and evil good. He was the prototype for those whom the Lord has unequivocally denounced in the Scriptures. Cursed are all those who shall lift up the heel against mine anointed, saith the Lord, and cry, they have sinned, when they have not sinned before me, saith the Lord. but have done that which was meet in mine eyes, and which I commanded them. But those who cry transgression do it because they are the servants of sin, and are the children of disobedience themselves. And cursed are those who swear falsely against my servants, that they might bring them into bondage and death." Close quote. Keep in mind that when Satan made his accusations in the premortal existence during the war in heaven, he and his rebellious followers could be seen among the other premortal spirits. It's not like today in mortality, where Satan's influence is felt, but he remains, with only limited exceptions, an unseen figure in the world. Even though this difference exists, I think we can see in the history of the ancient church what it must have been like for the premortal spirits to see their premortal accusers in heaven. That is, after Christ established his ancient church, the members were persecuted, commencing with the non-believing Jews who reported their religious activities and faith in Jesus Christ to local magistrates within the Roman Empire. The Jews made false accusations against the Christians. For example, in the era of emperor worship in the Roman Empire, the Jews frequently and falsely accused Christians of refusing to worship the emperor. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a true accusation because the Christians did, in fact, refuse to worship the emperors. Oh, and by the way, the very Jews that accused the Christians of refusing to worship the emperor were guilty of the same offense. The Jews refused to worship the emperor, and yet they would report to the local magistrates that the Christians were refusing to do so in order that they might be convicted and punished according to the Roman law, which on not so infrequent occasions meant execution. But there's a half-truth in all this that Satan always uses when he makes his accusations. The Jews reported to local magistrates that the Christians were refusing to worship the emperors because they were traitors to the empire. In other words, the worship of the emperor was viewed as evidence that people were loyal to the emperor and to the empire. And if Christians were refusing to worship the emperor, that must mean they were rebelling against the empire. That's the half-truth. It is true they refused to worship the emperor, but they were not rising up against the empire by their refusal. These accusations, filled with half-truths, have their origin in the premortal accusations of Satan and his followers, as described by William Burkitt, who said in 1703 that by Satan's instruments before men, the primitive Christians were accused by their enemies to the magistrates as guilty of the most villainous practices in their religious assemblies. Close quote. Revelation 12:10 states that Satan made his accusations against his brethren, saying, "For the accuser of our brethren is cast down." This phrase confirms that the loud voice in Revelation 12:10 comes from the premortal spirits who kept their first estate and were celebrating the defeat of Satan and his followers. But notice that the verse does not say specifically that Satan accused those who were rejoicing in Satan's defeat. It's not like the voice says, "Our accuser is cast down." Instead, the voice says that the accuser of our brethren is cast down. In one sense, the loud voice seems to come from the uncommitted and lukewarm spirits from the Grand Council who were ultimately converted during the war in heaven by the preaching and teaching of the gospel by the defenders of the faith. I'm speaking here about the sons of God, who made covenants and became members of the premortal Church of God at the time of the Grand Council, as I discussed in my podcast from October 7 of 2025. These are the brethren. And when the uncommitted spirits made covenants and became members of the premortal church during the war in heaven, They became figurative brethren in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, if this perspective is correct, then obviously Satan accused members of the premortal church of any number of false accusations and half-truths to thwart their efforts to convert the uncommitted spirits to join the church in heaven. It's really not very different than what we see today. How many accusations are leveled against the church today by people influenced by the same satanic motives present in premortality? The accusations, persecutions, slanderers, and half-truths that are made against the church today should only reinforce our faith in Jesus Christ and in his restored gospel called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If the church was not true, Satan would not waste his time and energy making his false accusations against it. He puts his energies where truth and salvation can be found. Remember that in Revelation 12:10, the same loud voice rejoiced because salvation had come. This I discussed in my podcast on November 25 of 2025. Well, Satan's attempt to destroy the premortal church by his accusations is the same way he attempts to destroy the church today. These signs in heaven clearly have their likeness on earth, as I discussed in my prior podcast. By these signs and likenesses, we can be sure that Satan seeks to destroy the true church of Jesus Christ by slanderous and accusatory means, as he did in the premortal existence. Brigham Young said, "As it has always been and will be yet for some time, when the sons of God assemble together, Satan will be on hand as an accuser of the brethren, to find fault with those who are trying to do good." Close quote. Elder William T. Two made a similar observation, but focused his comments on those from within the church and from without the church who accuse or criticize the leaders of the church, meaning those whom we would refer to as the brethren with a capital B. Elder Two said, "The war in heaven was a war between the brethren and the accusers of the brethren. Satan is here in our midst. This is his dominion. He is the accuser of the brethren, and when we find ourselves accusing our brethren, belittling them before men, we are fighting Satan's battles that he is hoping will be victorious." Close quote. So the premortal brethren with a capital B refers to Michael and the other premortal spirits loyal to Jehovah from the time of the Grand Council. Joseph Fielding McConkie said, "Who were the brethren that were being so persistently accused? Undoubtedly, Adam, as the leader of the righteous spirits, would have been a prime target of the devil's scorn. And who were the angels who fought either with Adam or the devil? No doubt all the sons and daughters of God were aware of the underlying issues being discussed over which the war in heaven was fought." Close quote. We may also assume that even though Jesus Christ was not personally present on Kolob to be involved in this premortal war of words and ideology, he too was the object of Satan's false accusations. Brent Topp has written, "In the literal sense, it may have been that Lucifer and his followers accused Jehovah and the brethren before the Father, much like Korihor, the third Antichrist mentioned in the Book of Mormon, denounced and accused the prophet Alma." Close quote. Satan made his false accusations and complained against Jehovah, Michael, and the other brethren. However, if we liken these circumstances to a court of law, as I suggested earlier, there must also be a judge who hears the evidence and who presides over the trial. Revelation 12:10 specifically states that Satan accused the brethren before our God. Based on what I have discussed thus far, it appears certain that God the Father was the only judge who could consider and deliberate upon the premortal accusations of Satan against Jehovah, Michael, and his brethren. Some scholars and commentators, both within the church and outside the church, suggest that these accusations against the brethren were made in the very presence of God. That is, the accusations were made directly to the face of God. It seems unlikely, however, that God the Father was present on Kolob to act like a referee during the battle, making sure that everyone kept the rules and would throw down a red flag if someone was off sides. Similarly, it was not like the premortal combatants stood before the bench in a courtroom and one side makes an objection that the judge must then rule upon. Neither was the situation like a scene from the movie called While You Were Sleeping with Sandra Bullock. Now, you may recall that near the end of the movie that I'm sure everyone has seen, Lucy, played by Sandra Bullock, was about to marry Peter, a man whose life she had saved and who had been in a coma for several weeks. Before Peter's near-death experience, Lucy had never actually met him, but during his coma, everyone had come to believe that Lucy and Peter were engaged. So when he came out of his life-changing coma, Peter asks Lucy to marry him in the hospital where he was recovering. When we get to the part where the minister asks whether there is anyone who has an objection to the marriage going forward, Lucy timidly raises her hand and says, "I object." Now, this, of course, startled the minister because usually the bride is not one of the objecting parties. However, as soon as Lucy objected to her own marriage, Peter's brother spoke up and said, "I also have to object." So now the objections of both Lucy and Jack stemmed from the fact that Lucy and Jack had fallen in love with each other while Peter was comatose. No sooner had Jack objected to the wedding when Peter's real fiancée, Ashley, suddenly shows up in the small hospital chapel and says that she also objects to the marriage of Lucy and Peter because Peter is engaged to her. Well, Ashley's objection was barely complete when her husband shows up in the chapel and says, "I object to your objection." By this time, the minister is rolling his eyes and saying, "Get in line." Now, I tell you about this scene from the movie primarily because it was a pretty funny scene from the movie. Secondarily, I tell you about this scene because that's not what it was like in the premortal existence. Stuff like Lucy's wedding only happens in Hollywood. So I'm sure that's a real shocker for you. I'm sure. The bottom line is this. God the Father was not present on Kolob listening to the accusations and objections of one party against the other, nor was he there to listen to objections about the objections that had been made by the contending parties. The accusations and objections came before God in the sense that he allowed these accusatory proceedings to occur on Kolob in the premortal existence. The Father allowed the accusations to be made so that the necessary opposition in all things would be present in the first estate, as there is a necessary opposition in all things here upon this mortal earth. Alvin R. Dyer has said, "Lucifer, knowing well the plan of God, continues to oppose it here upon the earth. This is permitted by God the Father for a purpose, as has been stated. The tolerances of this kingdom of evil as a source of opposition unto the sons and daughters of God is seen in the fact that the spirits of good men cannot interfere with the wicked beyond their prescribed bounds. Michael the archangel dared not bring a railing accusation against the devil, but said, 'The Lord rebuke thee, Satan.' This no doubt means that for the duration of man's earth life existence, Michael has been directed not to bind and banish this evil force, but the day of reckoning will come, and Lucifer and his evil hosts will be banished." Close quote. Since Satan was the accuser of our brethren in premortality, Michael is viewed as the advocate in favor of the brethren according to rabbinic tradition. Marvin Vincent has said that the correct form of the Greek for accuser is a transcript of the rabbinical Hebrew. The rabbins had a corresponding term for Michael as the advocate of God's people. The phrase is applied to Satan nowhere else in the New Testament. Close quote. As the advocate, Michael stands in opposition to Satan, the accuser. As an advocate, Michael pleads our cause with Christ and the Father. Michael, who is the mortal Adam, also defends and comforts those whom he advocates for. This is a very fitting role for the mortal Father of all God's spirit children on earth, save only Jesus Christ. We should be comforted by the fact that we have Michael or Adam as our advocate, like a father who loves and advocates for his children and his children's children, etc. As we discuss the accusations made by Satan and his followers before God in premortality, we should take note of 2 Peter 2:11, which states, "Whereas angels, which are greater in power and might, bring not railing accusation against the wicked before the Lord." Close quote. This verse contains an obscure reference to the premortal war in heaven when Michael and Satan fought against each other. In this conflict, we know that Satan made accusations against the brethren, but in 2 Peter 2:11, we're told that the angel Michael did not bring a railing accusation back against Satan before God. But what does it mean to say that Michael did not bring a railing accusation against Satan during the premortal war in heaven? Joseph Smith answers this question in the context of our earthly condition, saying, "The spirits of good men cannot interfere with the wicked beyond their prescribed bounds. For Michael, the archangel, dared not bring a railing accusation against the devil, but said, 'The Lord rebuke thee, Satan.'" Close quote. From this we learn that the plan of salvation requires the very conflicts between good and evil that many of us would like to do away with when we're burdened by the trials of life that beset us now as they did in premortality. We would like Michael to make a railing accusation to God on our behalf against Satan, so the Lord will intervene against Satan and lessen our trials. But that is not consistent with the plan of salvation. We need these trials so that we are made stronger because of them. The Lord will, in due course, rebuke Satan, but in the meantime, the Lord prescribes boundaries beyond which Satan cannot pass. Paul said to the Corinthian saints that the Lord will not suffer us to be tempted above that we are able, but will, with the temptation, make a way that we will be able to endure it. So it was in the premortality. Satan employed his slanderous accusations before God, which means that God was well aware of everything Satan did and every accusation he made during the premortal war in heaven, as though God was standing there personally. He allowed Satan's accusation against the brethren to occur so that the necessary opposition would be present for the proper testing of premortal spirits. Without Satan's accusations, the brethren could not endure the proper testing to demonstrate that they could and would keep their first estate. Brent Topp has said, "Lehi taught his son Jacob that there is an opposition in all things. If not so, righteousness could not be brought to pass." In order for agency to operate in the premortal world, as well as on earth, there was a need for opposites. Otherwise, man could not act for himself, save it should be that he was enticed by the one or the other. This is as much an eternal verity as is agency. Close quote. Monty Nyman has spoken of the need for premortal opposition, saying, "Such is the opposition in all things, so essential to the plan of salvation. We first encountered it in our premortal estate. It was there that the two churches came into being. They constituted the opposing powers in the war in heaven, a war which rages with ever-increasing intensity as we approach the end of telestial time. Close quote. Revelation 12:10 states that Satan made his accusations both day and night without ceasing or continuously throughout the war in heaven. These words are reminiscent of the parable of the unjust judge in Luke 18, verses 1 to 7. This parable concerns a judge in a certain city which feared not God, neither regarded man. A widow, however, came to this judge and said, "Avenge me of mine adversary." Initially, the judge would not do so, even though the parable implies that the widow's cause was just. Eventually, this unjust judge said within himself, "Though I fear not God, nor regard man, yet because this widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest by her continually coming she weary me." The moral of the story in Luke 18:7 is that God shall also avenge his own elect, which cry day and night unto him, though he bear long with them. This idea of importuning day and night means an activity that is continuous, enduring, and incessant, but also overbearing and domineering. In other words, Satan's accusations were not just ongoing throughout the war in heaven, they were oppressive and onerous. To illustrate what we're talking about, I will share with you a true experience in the life of my son Joshua. In high school, Josh was a social butterfly who enjoyed having a good time with his friends and classmates, even when class was in session. Jan, my very patient wife, was summoned more than once to the high school principal's office because of Josh's unruly behavior in class. There was this one teacher in particular that Joshua disliked, so he consistently and persistently went out of his way to cause problems and to be disruptive in her class. Metaphorically speaking, he did so day and night. So one day, Jan gets called to the principal's office once again because Josh had been removed from the classroom of this particular teacher on that particular day. When she arrived at the school, Josh said that he had done nothing wrong and that he was innocent. So at this point, we're all rolling our eyes because no one can believe it. Joshua, however, was very passionate in his defense, and he said that he had done nothing wrong and then explained what had happened when he walked into class on that particular day. He said, "I walked in and the teacher took one look at me and said, 'I can't take you today. Go to the principal's office.'" And so, as near as we can tell, that's literally what happened. And so it must have been in the premortal existence when Satan, the accuser, accused the brethren before God both day and night. Joshua had been so consistent and persistent in his classroom troublemaking that he wore down his teacher to the point that he was not allowed in her classroom. The brethren in premortality didn't have the luxury of sending Satan to the principal's office so they could have a breather. Eventually, of course, Satan was cast down at the end of the war in heaven, as I discussed in my podcast on November 23 of 2025. Well, in Revelation 12:10, the premortal spirits who kept their first estate rejoice, saying that Satan is cast down. This aorist verb tense expresses a continuous action. It means essentially that Satan was cast out completely once and for all. Brent Topp explains what this meant for Satan and his followers, saying, "Because of their open rebellion against light and truth, because they defied God and his government, knowing perfectly what the will of the Father was, they were cast out of heaven unto this earth. Their punishment, eternal damnation, progression ceased for them. No mortal bodies would ever house their spirit forms. For them there was no second estate, no probationary experiences, no resurrection, no eternal life, nothing but darkness and defiance, nothing but wickedness and rebellion, nothing but hatred and evil to all eternity, because they came out in open rebellion, and with a perfect knowledge of the course they then pursued and of the consequences that attended it, they fought against God." Close quote. When Satan was cast down and out after the war in heaven, he was completely vanquished and overthrown. Never again could he bring accusations in the court of heaven. His habitual accusations against the brethren ended for good. Fortunately, and to bring some closure to my Joshua story, the casting down of Satan ends the analogy to my son. Joshua was not cast out of school permanently, and he did graduate from high school. He eventually graduated from medical school and is now a doctor with 2 sons of his own. As grandparents, Jan and I look forward to the justice that will come to Joshua when his own high school sons walk in his footsteps both night and day, encouraged by their grandparents. So that concludes my podcast for today and my complete discussion of Revelation 12:10. In my next podcast, I'll talk about the means by which Satan was cast down and out of heaven, as described by John in Revelation 12:11. So until then, thanks for watching, listening, sharing, and subscribing, and to Jen and Kristen for all their technical support and help. I'll see you next time on Unveiling Jesus Christ.